An ecological alert has been declared in Moldova. President Maya Sandu warned about the risk to water supplies following the Russian attack on the Dnistr power plant.
Following the Russian attack on the Ukrainian Novodnistrovsk power plant, oil spilled into the Dniester River, threatening Moldova's water supply. We have the ecological alert and are taking action to protect our population. Russia bears full responsibility.
Industrial oil stains have been detected in the Dniester River following the Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine. According to the Ministry of Economy and Environment of Ukraine, preliminary data suggests that the pollution of the Dniester River is due to a leak of missile fuel following the Russian strike on March 7. In addition, on the night of March 14, during a Russian airstrike in Ukraine, a Shahed drone violated Moldovan airspace. This was reported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Moldova. The ministry stated that such incidents constitute a gross violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. In addition, these events undermine national security and endanger its citizens.
The Republic of Moldova strongly condemns these actions and the aggressive war that the Russian Federation is waging against Ukraine, thereby causing immense suffering, losses, and destruction in that country, and seriously undermining regional security, directly threatening the safety of Moldovan citizens.
Let us recall that on the night of March 14, Russia launched one of its largest attacks on Ukraine. According to the military, Russian forces fired 68 missiles of various types and more than 400 drones.
Mikhail, let's move on to Moldova. The Russians, completely disregarding any norms of international law and respect for other people's borders, which is obvious, have invaded Moldovan airspace. By the way, it is said that a major ecological disaster has almost begun in Moldova due to the impact on the Ukrainian power plant, which is directly connected to them and affects their entire territory. Now, please tell us, what situation should Moldova prepare for it? Do you think that Russia could intensify its pressure or even increase its military presence in the Republic?
No, it cannot increase anything. Moldova has known for a long time what it is preparing for. They know that if Ukraine loses the war, Moldova will cease to exist because it will have no means to resist the Russian army. That is why there are more and more voices in Moldova in favor of joining Romania and thus being able to enter NATO. Even Maya Sandu strongly supports the union with Romania, but she does not put the issue on the table because she knows that the majority does not yet support this idea. They are preparing for that, yes, but only in case Ukraine is defeated. If Ukraine does not fall, Moldova will not fall automatically either. That is something that everyone understands perfectly. How could the Russians increase their military presence there? They cannot even enter. Moldova has no border with Russia. Moldova borders both Romania and us. And the sea, well, access to the Black Sea. Access to the Black Sea is controlled by the Ukrainian, Romanian, and Turkish military in those areas, but mainly by us. Physically, no Russian soldier can enter Moldova. There are flights, by the way, from Russia to Chisinau, but since they fly over countries of the European Union, European intelligence keeps a close eye on them. They control who flies, physically verifying each name, because if you fly over the territory of Lesi, Poland, you have to give the passenger list to the Poles, and they check that no Russian soldiers are traveling, at least not in significant numbers. So those 500, nobody knows the exact number because some reproduced, others died or fled. There were about 500 Russian soldiers in Transnistria when our war began. That's all. 500 people have no reinforcements, and of course they have no new weapons. They have ammunition, but nobody can get it out of there. Therefore, as long as Ukraine holds out, everything will be more or less calm in Moldova. But Ukraine's defeat would mean Moldova's defeat.
We've already talked about Moldova, now let's talk about Estonia. There is an interesting precedent reported by the Bild newspaper, where Russian propaganda social networks are actively promoting the idea of creating the so-called Narva People's Republic in Ayakamvoht in Estonia. It is a city bordering the Russian Federation, separated by a river with about 55,000 inhabitants. They report that propagandists are spreading maps as flags and calls for sabotage and armed resistance against the government. Maps, of course, where Narva appears to be annexed to Russia. What do you think about these attempts to destabilize this situation? Could the Russians attack the Baltic region with these kinds of ideas?
Lucas Devas Tag and and they could even do it militarily. In that place, the river does not only divide Narva. On the Estonian side is Narva, and on the Russian side is Ivangorod, with a castle in the middle of the bridge. And the Estonians are very seriously preparing to defend Narva. In fact, there are already so-called dragon's teeth on that bridge. It's full of trenches and excavations. I think, if I remember correctly, that the bridge might even be closed already. Oh, I don't know if the border crossing is still open because they've been opening and closing it, closing it. In other words, Estonia is preparing for such an attack. Swedish troops have definitely been deployed in Estonia to repel any possible aggression. And there are probably two vulnerable points like this in the Baltics. The first is Narva, on the border with Ivangorod in the Leningrad region, and the second is Daugavpils on the border with Latvia. Daugavpils on the border with, I think, the Vitebsk region in Belarus. It's a city that's also right on the border, and it's also clear that Russian troops could enter there at any time. Why these 2 points in particular? Because in Daugavpils, the majority are Russian-speaking. In Narva, I think they are too. In Daugavpils, pro-Russian parties always want the elections before the war be. Now, all that has changed a bit. I mean, that's how it was before the full-scale war. So what the Russians are trying to do there is to create a kind of fifth column with the Russian-speaking population of Estonia living in those cities. That's why it's a real threat. I mean, if the Russians start, they'll do it from one of those points. In addition, they could organize a supposed scenario there, like the one in the DPR or LOPR, saying that it's supposedly the local population and not the Russian army, although it will be the Russian army, in order for NATO. To make NATO's actions more difficult, Russian troops enter Narva disguised as partisans. Will the Finnish troops bomb St. Petersburg at that moment or not? That's the big question, because they're obliged to counterattack the Russian Federation, and Russia will say that it wasn't them. And then NATO politicians, even before the generals, will be faced with a question. Do we respond on a large scale or not on a large scale? Do we limit the war to the territory of Narva and fight only there? Or do we logistically isolate St. Petersburg and the rest? Do we launch an offensive and recapture Karelia? That is a big question. And I think there are countries that are prepared for such a war. The Nordic countries, Finland and Sweden, I think are ready right now. But other more powerful NATO countries like Germany and France, I don't think they are prepared to fight for Estonia and Latvia.
Friends, I invite you to subscribe to the Julian channel. It is essential for us and for you if you want to continue receiving verified information. Mikhail, continuing on the subject of our neighbors, Hungary, I cannot fail to mention it. There are large protests against Orbán. It is clear that Viktor Orbán has decided to choose Ukraine as the target of hatred in order to win the upcoming elections. I would like to ask you, what real chances of victory do you think he has? And to what extent do you think Hungarian society will support the idea that Orbán is spreading, that supporting Peter Mart, his main political rival, is equivalent to working for Ukraine and becoming puppets of Zelensky? In fact, there are posters with this message all over Budapest. Do you think this strategy will work for Orbán?
Well, it definitely has potential because we know the situation very well from the polls, and about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the difference was 12 points in favor of Magyar voter. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I think that gap has narrowed by 2%, and it narrowed precisely because of this, or because Orbán promotes a strong anti-European and anti-Ukrainian rhetoric. So, for now, in principle, he is gaining some points with this. It's about swaying the undecided. That 12% gap between those already committed and those who still haven't decided yet, we will fight for them now. That's why both politicians, both wings, both movements are now naturally so active and will be for the next 4 weeks until the elections, or 3 weeks and 6 days. And, well, the truth is that it's unpredictable. I wouldn't bet anything right now. If I had to bet money, I wouldn't bet that Orbán is going to lose. I'm not sure about that yet.
We'll have to see when the elections get closer. And for now, I would say that the opposition has no guaranteed victory. And of course, it's not necessarily just one issue either. There are many issues. It's not just the issue of, well, Ukraine, and here you have the crisis in Iran, and the increase in the price of gasoline, and the increase in... It's rising in Hungary, just worldwide. Orban comes out and says, see, it's all because Ukraine cut the Rosba pipeline, and because of that, the price of gasoline went up by 20 euro cents. Is this what they wanted or not what they wanted? And there you can see how they are also taking advantage of this current situation. So for now, the external situation even benefits Orban a little, I think, which is why it's possible that he will manage to close that gap. In addition, the electoral system in Hungary is complex. It was designed under Orban's mandate, specifically for his party. For example, remember that until the last elections, we had both majority districts and party lists. Here, half are by majority and the other half by lists. But in Hungary, I think only 40% of seats are allocated by party lists and the other 60% by majority. So that gap does not give the opposition such a big advantage in seats in parliament, because they also have to win in the majority districts. So not everything is rosy.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Moldova has initiated the procedure for denouncing the fundamental documents of the IC, which means the final withdrawal from the organization. It was stated there that Russia violated the fundamental principles of the community. In addition, this step is part of Moldova's course of European integration, TELIS. Now the decision must be approved by the country's parliament.
Withdrawal from the IC's statutory bodies will allow saving 3.1 million LN from the state budget annually. This amount corresponds to the membership fee. At the same time, the free movement of citizens of the Republic of Moldova in the SCI countries will not be affected, since it is largely regulated by existing bilateral agreements or befehlsitens. Denouncing the founding treaties will not affect agreements within the IC that bring economic benefits to the country. This is stated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Moldova on the institution's website.
Experts note that this decision has become part of Moldova's strategy to gradually reject the political and economic pressure from the Kremlin and accelerate the course towards European integration.
Moldova never felt comfortable in the SCI because the SCI existed for the benefit of Russia, so that Russia could control the Republic of Moldova and other former Soviet republics that were then part of the SCI. Although we were members of the SCI, Russia closed the market for us, both for wine and for Moldovan fruits, vegetables, and other products. That is why the Republic of Moldova has long since taken a westerly course towards joining the European Union, and it is impossible to sit on two chairs in two boats and go both towards Siberia and Brussels.
Moldova's withdrawal from the SCI demonstrates the decline in trust in Russia and at the same time confirms the state's desire to move towards the European Union. This is how Brussels reacted to the Chisinau decision. We noted that after Russia's large-scale aggressive war against Ukraine, Moldova began to withdraw from the structure and in fact practically ceased its participation. But Moldova did this in order to align itself with the European Union's common foreign and security policy, which is undoubtedly a very good step and the right choice for the Moldovan people, because Russia cannot be trusted. Therefore, we will continue to support Moldova in all its endeavors on the path to Europe and EMENA. According to experts, the Moldovan parliamentary elections held in September also indicate a weakening of Russian influence in the region all again. 2025. At that time, Russia, despite its attempts to spread its propaganda through corruption, disinformation, and cyber attacks, failed. According to analysts, this shows that the majority of Moldovan citizens sent a clear signal of support for the course towards EU integration. On March 10, the leaders of Moldova and Lithuania discussed European integration issues during a meeting in Vilnius. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda stated that he welcomes the progress in implementing reforms that the Moldovan government is achieving.
We welcome the progress in implementing reforms achieved by Moldova. Despite the difficult circumstances, we urge Moldova to continue and accelerate the necessary reforms related to the European Union to make them irreversible and their benefits tangible and understandable for society. Gitanas Nausėda president of Lithuania.
According to Nauseda, Moldova's accession, like Ukraine, like Ukraine's to the European Union by 2030, is a strategic goal for Lithuania. The president expressed hope that this process could be accelerated. Moldova's position on Ukraine remains unchanged. Following another Russian attack on Ukraine, Moldovan President Sandu urged the international community not divert attention from the Ukrainian state. Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure constitute war crimes. Moldova condemns them unconditionally. The international community should focus on Ukraine. Now is not the time to back down. Maya Sandu, President of the Republic of Moldova, on the social network X. It was the war in Ukraine that made the Moldovan government understand that the Russian Federation cannot be trusted, experts say. The danger from Russia prompted Chisinau to take countermeasures.
The events that took place in Ukraine woke up our politicians. They reviewed all documents related to security. Now we are creating an institution whose purpose is to fight, to combat this hybrid war of Russia. The people of the Republic of Moldova and the political forces of the Republic of Moldova now understand that we must stand on the side of Ukraine, on the side of the West.
Analysts note that if Russia somehow manages to seize power, Moldova could become a platform for a hybrid war against the EU. In addition, Moscow will strengthen its military presence, creating an additional threat to Ukraine. On the other hand, Moldova's accession to the European Union will ensure peaceful cooperation and strengthen Europe by one more country.
Jenta Bursa, a political analyst and the executive director of the NATO Information and Documentation Center in the Republic of Moldova, is now with us.
Ion, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ion, let's remind our viewers so that they have a global understanding. Perhaps some of them don't remember what this community is, what the SCI organization is, what it could bring to Moldova, what was really useful for Moldova in this cooperation. I just want to remind you in simple terms. It is a regional international organization that was created in 1991 to ensure a civilized separation of the former USSR republics. Civilization was not achieved because, as I recall, both with Ukraine and with Moldova, the Russian Federation always had certain conditions, negotiations, and other threats, including economic ones. So what did Moldova give the seal?
Actually, the SCI did not give anything special to the Republic of Moldova. Rather, it was out of habit. In the early years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the former leaders of the ex-Soviet republics were accustomed to communicating with each other out of inertia, so to speak. The CIS was a very suitable platform for this, for them to come together and to have the illusion that they were still together. On paper, the CIS was supposed to be an organization that would later serve as a common platform for integration processes, especially economic ones. But it never came to that because the Russian Federation very quickly began to see the CIS and deeply understand this entire structure as a sphere of its interests and geopolitical aspirations. It can be said that it was precisely because of the Russian Federation that the integration processes that the leaders of the former Soviet republics or leaders of the new states initially trusted and expected never took place. Let us recall how about 10-15 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, President Lukashenko accused the Russian Federation that precisely because of him, these integration processes were progressing further and becoming more serious because the Russian Federation uses various economic and energy levers to exert pressure on the post-Soviet countries. And it can be said that, yes, the CIS was rather something geopolitical, a concept of the Russian Federation The Russian Federation even invented a special name for it, the Near Abroads, but it is a amorphous structure that never worked. And relations between the countries were based precisely on bilateral agreements, international treaties, specific bilateral agreements, instead of being established as simple multilateral agreements.
How long could it take for the Republic of Moldova to completely leave the CIS, considering the experience of Ukraine, given that Ukraine did not sign or ratify the CIS statutes? That is, in essence, it was never a full member of the CIS. It only had the status of a founding state. So, if we take our history in this sense, in its entirety, Ukraine completed its withdrawal from the CIS only in 2018. This was practically without having fully joined this post-Soviet organization. How long do you think this might take for Moldova? And what is the main sign of these exits? The initiation of this exit in Moscow?
Here we need to make a clarification. Well, the Republic of Moldova began this process of withdrawal 2 years ago. Exactly 2 years ago, in 2023, we cancelled the agreements within the Commonwealth of Independent States. It says precisely that all agreements must be cancelled. It will take about 6 months to formalize the divorce officially, maybe a little longer. We have now reached the point where we are annulling, withdrawing from the fundamental acts of the creation of the Commonwealth of Independent States, because the Republic of Moldova, if my memory serves me correctly, signed about 180 agreements within the framework of the Commonwealth of Independent States, and we have annulled and withdrawn, I think, from about 2/3 of all these documents, because this process has been going on for these 2 years, and we are practically now on the verge of a complete withdrawal. It is possible that some agreements still remain within the framework of the Commonwealth of Independent States and this structure, but they will not be of such importance. And those that existed had no practical utility or real application. And the message is most likely actually primarily symbolic in nature, because it is symbolic precisely for the Russian Federation. Because we have reached the point where we have practically started the process of joining another organization, namely the European Union. And it is precisely now that we are withdrawing from the fundamental treaties of the IC, because we formal political agreement for association with the European Union, or for accession to the European Union, or OD. We are currently at the technical level, but we have practically already started negotiations, and as we move towards accession to the European Union, of course, we will gradually leave the Commonwealth of Independent States. This is a very clear and precise signal to the Russian Federation, because the Republic of Moldova has no intention of entering the geopolitical space of the Russian Federation. We do want to build a European state, but we have a different path of development. We want and must join the European Union. Of course, we have the same intentions. Ukraine and these post-Soviet countries together must separate themselves from the space that the Russian Federation is trying to control and bring under its control. We all see what unfortunate and tragic consequences this will have. These specificities, of course, have had consequences for these countries. Shamit, we are talking in particular about Ukraine, because the Russian Federation sees these countries as its geopolitical space of influence.
Of course, it also sees resources, possibly for future larger-scale wars. It should be noted, so that our viewers do not get the wrong impression, that the conditions for joining the EU do not imply the withdrawal of other organizations such as the SE. No, there is no absolutely formal legal requirement. And the fact that the path...
Yes, of course there is. However, in this way, we will be sending a very clear signal to the Russian Federation, that we have a different development path and that we actually want to build a different model of statehood, not according to the model of the Russian Federation.
And why is this? Because the Russian Federation itself created such conditions, including political ones. Let's discuss how Moldova is living today after the parliamentary elections in Moldova in 2025, in fact. This is evidence of the weakening of Russian influence in the region. And the head of the Center for Combating Press, Delegating Press Information of the National Bank of Ukraine, Andriko Kovalenko, has already spoken about this, realizing the situation now. And he noted that Russia lost Moldova in the same way that it lost Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Baltic states, and Ukraine. This is despite the fact that to this day, the Russian Federation continues to enter in elections in countries such as Hungary, where let's also remember Romania, and so on. What is the current situation in Moldova, considering that if we take the experience, so to speak, if we take the example of its neighboring country, Romania, this information was actively deployed there, and this also had an influence on people's choices vis-a-vis.
Yes, Romania has its own peculiarities. There, a wave was intentionally created, a kind of nostalgic wave about the communist period, overshadowed by the communists. They started talking about a national state, Romania, not like now, not like the European Union, and the Russian Federation, through their channels and social networks, managed to play on emotions and create such a phenomenon. Kalina Zorchevsky, then George Simeon. But the state institutions of Romania managed to survive, and this, of course, was also a defeat for the Russian Federation. As for the Republic of Moldova, yes, of course, now after the elections we have some Karl Basalia. We see how the Russian Federation is trying to readjust its approach towards the Republic of Moldova. We are under no illusions that Russia has left Moldova alone and that we are now going to exactly integrate into the European Union. It is most likely that the Russian Federation has taken a break to reflect and to conceive or develop a new strategy for the Republic of Moldova. And this year, from a political point of view, it can be said that it is a politically apolitical year because we do not have any elections. Normally, every year, we have certain elections. First, local elections, then presidential elections, and finally, parliamentary elections. This year, we do not have any elections, which is probably why there is some calm. But next year, we will have local elections, and of course, we will see moves by the Russian Federation that will try to influence the outcome or how these elections will be conducted and their outcome. An outcome. Now, there is more talk about Transnistria, about the fate of Transnistria, and it is through Transnistria that Russian political parties and actors in the Republic of Moldova are trying to influence society, specifically that the Republic of Moldova must necessarily integrate with Transnistria, that we cannot start negotiations without it. In this way, they are trying to influence the process of integration of the Republic of Moldova into the European Union through Transnistria, because in this way they are trying to get leverage so that Transnistria itself becomes the obstacle without which the Republic of Moldova will not be able to integrate into the European Union, will not be owned. But from the beginning of next year, the Russian Federation will certainly try to increase its pressure on the Republic of Moldova once again